the heart of this nation, under skies so blue,
There's a spirit that's stirring, values strong and true.
from the mountains to the prairies, from the cities to the sea. We stand for liberty, for faith and family. We're diving deep into the heart of what we believe.
2 hours. I mean, that is exactly how close the world came today
Yeah.
to a catastrophic, landscape-altering regional war.
Yeah, it really is staggering.
And, forget the traditional image of global diplomacy, right? The giant mahogany tables in Geneva, the tailored suits, the weeks of hushed negotiations over expensive fountain pens.
Right, the stuff we're used to seeing on the news.
Exactly. We're looking at a modern geopolitical reality where the fate of a massive global conflict is decided, finalized, and broadcast to the globe with just 120 minutes on the clock. Straight from a smartphone screen.
The timeline we are dissecting today really redefines diplomatic whiplash.
It does.
Moving from the absolute brink of a devastating, multi-layered military strike to a sudden 2-week pause, and all of it playing out in a public, real-time digital arena.
Which is wild.
It is. It
Yeah.
just strips away all the bureaucratic insulation we are so used to seeing in international relations.
And that unprecedented speed is exactly what we're unpacking in today's deep dive, which is tailored specifically for you listening right now.
Because it impacts everyone.
Oh, absolutely. So it is Tuesday, April 7th, 2026. President Trump has just announced a 2-week ceasefire with Iran.
Right?
And our mission today is to dissect the mechanics of this incredibly tight timeline. We need to figure out the underlying logic of the unexpected key players who stepped in.
Which we'll get to because that is fascinating.
Oh, yeah. And we'll examine the massive logistical hurdles hidden inside the stated terms of this ceasefire. And we're pulling all of this from a specific set of sources, mainly an article and its embedded real-time social media reporting from the conservative news outlet, townhall.com.
Yeah, and before we analyze the mechanics of this timeline, we need to establish the operational parameters of the source material itself.
Good point.
The reporting from Town Hall comes with a heavy, explicit political viewpoint. The article features an editor's note framing the event triumphantly, praising President Trump for, and I quote here, eliminating the threat from Iran once and for all. And it actively criticizes former presidents as being, all talk and no action. So to be absolutely clear to you listening, our goal is not to endorse this political stance, nor are we opposing it. We are neutrally extracting the factual data points from this source and analyzing how a highly charged narrative is constructed in real time.
Okay, let's unpack this because getting breaking geopolitical news from a single politically explicit outlet is, it's like reading a legally binding contract where the facts are written in standard black ink, but the editorial board has gone over the entire document with a thick neon highlighter.
That's a great way to look at it.
Right, like they are actively trying to force your eyes toward a very specific predetermined conclusion.
Yeah.
So you can read the raw facts, but you have to consciously ignore the glare of the highlighter to understand the fundamental reality of what the contract actually says.
Which requires, separating the physical timeline of events from the emotional framing that's applied to them.
So let's look at that raw physical timeline, because the dramatic nature of how this unfolded is just, it's staggering.
Absolutely.
President Trump announced this ceasefire directly on his platform, Truth Social. And the detail that demands immediate scrutiny is the timing. According to the source, the deadline for U.S. military action was avoided with just 2 hours to spare.
Just 120 minutes.
Yeah. Trump's post explicitly mentions suspending a, quote, destructive force being sent tonight to Iran.
The immediacy of that phrase, sent tonight, it really indicates that the machinery of war had already passed the planning phase.
Right. It wasn't just a threat anymore.
Exactly. It had entered the operational execution phase. And you see the social media ecosystem immediately erupt because of that.
Like instantly.
Accounts functioning as these digital town criers like Rapid Report and Newswire, they blasted out the headline in all caps. Trump agreed to suspend Iran bombing for 2 weeks.
But I really struggle to see the strategic value in this. Taking a massive high-stakes military deadline down to a 120-minute window looks terrifyingly chaotic.
It does look chaotic from the outside.
Right. Is a 2-hour window just an action movie trope? Or does taking a military deadline down to the wire serve a strategic purpose in these kinds of negotiations? Because in a 2-hour window, one misread radar blip or one delayed communication means a war starts entirely by accident.
What's fascinating here is that you are identifying the inherent systemic risk of brinkmanship, but the strategy behind it is entirely deliberate.
Really? Deliberate how?
Well, taking an ultimatum down to the final hours forces immediate, unfiltered action by stripping away the luxury of time. Think about it. When diplomats have 2 weeks to decide something, they posture.
Oh, sure. They hold endless committees. They argue over commas.
Exactly. They argue over the placement of commas in a draft text. But when you have 2 hours before bombers cross a sovereign threshold, all posturing evaporates.
The clock is ticking.
The clock itself becomes the primary weapon. It forces the parties involved to reveal their absolute bottom lines because the consequences of holding back are no longer theoretical.
But, I mean, that assumes the parties involved are behaving entirely rationally, right? And that they have perfect communication.
Which is a big assumption.
A huge assumption.
Yeah.
A 2-hour window to halt a destructive force isn't just about making a phone call. What does a recall actually look like at that stage of military readiness?
The logistics of a halt at T-minus 120 minutes are incredibly complex.
Yeah.
You were talking about bombers likely already fueled and sitting on the tarmac.
Or maybe already in the air.
Right, already airborne in holding patterns. You have targeting packages loaded into naval missile systems.
Wow.
You have entire fleets operating under radio silence to avoid detection. Reversing that momentum requires secure, verified flash communications down an immense chain of command.
The risk of an accident is huge.
The risk of a fatal miscalculation is astronomical, which is precisely why pushing the timeline this far is meant to show maximum resolve.
Because the friction of that military machine being fully engaged is what finally forces the opponent to yield. Like the pressure is at absolute maximum.
Exact.
But the U.S. and Iran famously do not have direct, open lines of diplomatic communication. They rely on intermediaries.
Always.
And the intermediary who stepped in to stop this ticking clock was entirely unexpected. It wasn't the United Nations. It wasn't a traditional European ally like, Switzerland.
No.
Trump explicitly credited his decision to pause the strike to conversations with 2 specific leaders from Pakistan, Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif and Field Marshal Asim Munir.
The source distinctly notes that these 2 Pakistani leaders directly requested that Trump hold off the imminent attack.
Here's where it gets really interesting because, why Pakistan?
Right.
It's like 2 people are squared up, ready to fight, and a very specific neighbor steps off their porch to intervene. Of all the diplomatic channels in the world, relying on Pakistan's civilian and military leadership to pump the brakes on a Middle Eastern war seems highly irregular.
On the surface, yes.
Because Pakistan has its own severe internal political volatility, right, and economic struggles. Depending on them as the primary anchor for regional stability in a 2-hour window feels like an enormous gamble.
Well, it looks irregular if you only view global diplomacy through a Western-centric lens.
Okay, fair point.
If you analyze the structural geopolitics of the region, Pakistan's involvement is fundamentally pragmatic. First of all, Pakistan physically borders Iran to the east.
Right. They're next door.
But geography is only the baseline. Pakistan is a nuclear-armed nation with one of the largest standing militaries in the world.
Which gives them huge leverage.
Exactly. This is precisely why Field Marshal Asim Munir was involved alongside the prime minister. In Pakistan, the military apparatus holds immense independent geopolitical weight.
So it's less like a neighbor stepping off a porch to break up a fistfight, and more like a structural firewall between 2 highly combustible wings of a building. Like Pakistan is positioned in a way where if the fire spreads from Iran, their own security architecture burns down.
A structural firewall is a highly accurate way to visualize it. Pakistan has deep, intricate security and economic stakes in the stability of the Middle East.
They can't afford a war next door.
Not at all. A full-scale kinetic conflict next door in Iran creates immediate, tangible crises for Islamabad. We are talking about massive refugee flows across a highly porous border,
Oh, wow. Yeah.
severe disruptions to their energy imports, and the potential radicalization of sectarian groups within their own borders.
Wow.
Furthermore, Pakistan maintains functional relationships with both the United States and Iran.
So they basically hold the unique keys to both doors.
They do. In a moment of extreme brinkmanship, when the Swiss back channels might be too slow or, paralyzed by mutual mistrust, a powerful, directly affected regional player like Pakistan becomes the only viable bridge.
That makes total sense.
They possess the diplomatic gravity to get the U.S. president on a secure line and the proximity to understand exactly what the Iranian leadership is willing to concede to avoid a nighttime bombing campaign.
But Pakistan didn't just step in to ask the U.S. for a favor to protect their own border. They brought a very specific, incredibly demanding price tag to the table on behalf of the negotiations.
Yes, the terms.
Right. This pause comes with major, immediate strings attached, which brings us to the stated terms of the deal. Trump laid out a rigid condition for this pause on Truth Social.
And it was a big one.
Huge. He demanded that Iran must agree to the, quote, complete, immediate, and safe opening of the Strait of Hormuz, end quote. He also branded this a double-sided ceasefire.
The strategic emphasis placed on the Strait of Hormuz is really the fulcrum of this entire geopolitical crisis.
So what does this all mean for you and me navigating our daily lives? Well, think of the global economy as a massive, sprawling, interconnected highway system.
Okay.
The Strait of Hormuz is essentially the single, unavoidable toll booth on the absolute busiest section of that highway. Roughly 20% of the world's total oil consumption flows through that narrow waterway between Oman and Iran.
20%. That is massive.
Exactly. If that toll booth closes, or if ships are threatened, global energy prices spike instantly. Gas at your local station skyrockets, supply chains freeze, and inflation surges.
The economic stakes are existential for the global market.
But my question lies in the mechanics of Trump's demand. He used the words complete and immediate opening.
Right.
How realistic is an immediate opening of a highly militarized, deeply contested waterway within a fragile, 2-week ceasefire window?
This raises an important question because the reality of naval warfare makes an immediate opening nearly impossible from a logistical standpoint.
Logistically impossible.
Pretty much. You are looking at a severe collision between a political demand for immediacy and the physical reality of military de-escalation. To genuinely declare a contested strait open and safe is not achieved by a bureaucratic signature. It is a massive, highly technical military operation.
You can't just send out a tweet and have commercial tankers start floating through a war zone the next morning.
You absolutely cannot. I mean, you are talking about deploying specialized naval vessels to meticulously sweep the shipping lanes for acoustic and magnetic sea mines.
Wow, sea mines.
Yeah, you are talking about visually recalling swarms of fast-attack coastal boats back to their bases. You have to demonstrably power down anti-ship missile batteries positioned along the mountainous Iranian coastline.
All of which requires immense trust that the other side isn't going to use that stand down to launch a surprise attack.
Exactly. And crucially, none of that military de-escalation matters unless you can convince the commercial shipping syndicates organizations like Lloyd's of London to actually underwrite the insurance policies for these massive oil tankers.
Oh, the insurance. I didn't even think of that.
If the actuaries determine the area is still a war risk, the insurance premiums remain catastrophically high. And the strait remains economically closed, regardless of the political declarations made on social media.
Right.
That process of proving safety takes weeks, if not months, to verify.
Which introduces a glaring contradiction in the source material.
It does.
Trump demands this immediate, logistically complex military stand down in the strait, but in the exact same post, he claims that the U.S. has, quote, already met and exceeded all military objectives.
Right.
Well, if the military objectives are completely met and even exceeded, why is the strait still closed? If you have achieved total victory, you don't need to negotiate a 14-day window to open a waterway.
You have zeroed in on the core diplomatic friction of the announcement. He pairs that definitive claim of having exceeded military objectives with the announcement that Iran has put forward a 10-point peace plan.
Right, the 10-point plan.
Trump called this plan a workable start, estimating it will take these 2 weeks to finalize for long-term peace in the Middle East.
We go from a destructive force being sent tonight to analyzing a 10-point peace plan over the next 14 days. It is a staggering shift in momentum that feels highly discordant with the claim of a completed military victory.
The discordance reveals the true nature of the brinkmanship. The brinkmanship wasn't solely about deterrence or launching missiles. It was about generating enough sheer terror to force Iran to the table with a structured, written plan.
So the 2 weeks aren't just a breather?
No, the 2 weeks aren't a casual cooling off period. They serve as an aggressively tight, high-pressure deadline to turn a theoretical 10-point outline into a binding geopolitical reality.
And the victory claim.
The claim of having met objectives is rhetorical posturing. It's designed to allow the U.S. to enter those negotiations from a declared position of strength rather than admitting the pause was a concession.
That makes sense of the mechanics behind closed doors.
Mm.
But we also have to look at how this incredibly delicate, high-stakes information is being digested by the media and the public in real time.
Right.
Because the way this timeline is being analyzed publicly is almost as chaotic as the 2-hour countdown itself.
The real-time analysis is where the neon highlighter of the source material's bias becomes most apparent.
Totally. Because when you read the town hall editor's note, the tone is entirely definitive. It is triumphant.
Yeah.
They frame this as a total, completed victory, stating Donald Trump is eliminating the threat from Iran once and for all. It presents the ceasefire not as a tense, fragile pause for a stressful negotiation over a 10-point plan, but as the final period at the end of a long sentence.
It attempts to codify a fluid situation as a historical conclusion.
Exactly. But then you scroll down to the embedded social media posts right below that editorial, and these reflect the actual messy, real-time journalism happening on X, formerly Twitter.
It's a completely different vibe.
The contrast is jarring. You have Mario Nawfal, a prominent commentator, posting that a source close to the negotiations confirmed the ceasefire, and noting that Qatar's Al Arabi Al Jadid confirmed Iran accepted it too.
Right, getting verification.
But Nawfal immediately follows up his own breaking news with a critical question. He states he has gone back to his source to clarify one incredibly specific, vital thing. Is it actually a true ceasefire, or is it just a delay to Trump's bombing deadline?
Nawfal is highlighting the dangerous ambiguity hiding within the political rhetoric.
The confident editorial board claims total victory, while the raw intelligence gathering on X is actively trying to figure out the definition of the very word ceasefire in real time while the world watches.
It's a massive semantic issue.
But for you and me, tracking this from the outside, is there a functional difference? Does the semantic shift between a delay and a ceasefire actually alter the physical reality on the ground? Or are we just watching commentators argue over diplomatic terminology?
Oh, the distinction between those two words dictates the entire kinetic reality of the militaries involved. It is the furthest thing from semantic hair splitting.
Really? How so?
Well, a delay implies that the operational clock is merely paused. The bombers remain on the tarmac fully loaded, the naval targeting computers remain locked onto their coordinates, and the military action remains inevitable unless a miracle occurs during the pause.
So it's very precarious.
Extremely. A delay is a unilateral hold. It's one side keeping its finger hovering just millimeters above the button.
It's a stay of execution, but the executioner is still standing in the room.
Exactly. Now, a ceasefire, especially one that Trump explicitly labeled a double-sided ceasefire, mandates a mutual verified stand-down.
Okay.
It suggests that both the U.S. and Iran have actively agreed to pull back their forces, to de-escalate their immediate defensive postures, and to pivot their primary focus toward actualizing that 10-point peace plan.
That's a huge difference.
Right. So when Nawfal asks for that clarification, he is desperately trying to determine if the global community is sitting in a 14-day timeout before the missiles fly, or if a regional war has actually been fundamentally averted.
The anxiety in the real-time reporting makes perfect sense when you understand the mechanics of what those words demand from the generals on the ground. The neon tint of the town hall editorial gives you a feeling of absolute finality, but the raw, unfiltered data of the social media feeds exposes the terrifying uncertainty of the actual moment.
The uncertainty really defines the reality. The operational gap between a politically declared victory and a finalized, internationally recognized 10-point plan is immense.
14 days is barely enough time.
Barely. Bridging that logistical and diplomatic gap over the next 2 weeks will require an extraordinary amount of delicate, highly classified work that will not be visible on social media feeds or in editorial columns.
It is a remarkable, chaotic moment to analyze.
Yeah.
And as we bring this deep dive to a close, I want to connect this directly back to you, the listener.
Yeah, why does this matter?
Exactly. Why does dissecting the mechanics of this specific timeline matter to you right now?
Yeah.
Because you are watching a masterclass, or perhaps a deeply concerning cautionary tale, in how modern global stability is maintained.
Truly.
You are seeing the actual mechanics of how the fate of nations can be negotiated at the absolute last minute, halted with just a 2-hour window before impact.
Down to the wire?
You are seeing how nuclear-armed, third-party structural firewalls, like Pakistan's military leadership, wield massive hidden influence that can literally ground a bombing campaign.
Which is something you rarely hear about.
Right, and you are seeing how the physical reopening of a single heavily mined waterway, the Strait of Hormuz, is directly tied to the inflation, gas prices, and global economy that you participate in every single day. This isn't abstract political theory. It is the fragile, high-stakes machinery of our current world operating live on your phone.
The machinery is visible if you know where to look. And, as you process the mechanics of what we have explored today, I want to leave you with one final structural puzzle to mull over on your own.
Oh, I like a puzzle.
It builds on the core contradiction we identified in the timeline. We analyzed Trump's explicit statement that all U.S. military objectives were met and exceeded prior to this planned nighttime strike even taking place. So, if we operate on the assumption that this statement is objectively true, if the ultimate military goals were entirely achieved without ever launching this final wave of destructive force, then what specific unstated leverage is keeping both the U.S. and Iran locked at the negotiating table for the next 2 weeks? Right. If the United States has already won the military chess match, what is the invisible underlying threat that is actually driving both sides to finalize a 10-point peace plan?
That invisible pressure is the exact metric to watch over the next 14 days. Because as we saw today, the functional difference between a temporary delay and a lasting ceasefire can literally be decided by a single phone call with hours to spare. Keep an eye on the landscape and always remember to check the tint of the window you are looking through.
Under skies so blue, there's a spirit that's stirring, values strong and true. From the mountains to the prairies, from the cities to the sea, we stand for liberty, for faith and family. We're diving